Before I begin, I'd like to thank everybody at Gallatin Global for organizing this fellowship and this symposium. I'd like to thank Professor Zachary Lockman for being my independent study advisor this spring, Katia Hayek for being my summer internship supervisor, Bassam Haddad for also helping with my work and being a personal mentor this summer. And without further ado, I'm going to be providing a spoken word presentation on my summer project. So my name is Jamil Kallas. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a junior majoring in Middle Eastern Islamic Studies. This summer, I worked as an editor at the Salon Syria project, a digital publication dedicated to providing a platform for discourse on Syria in a time when it is in desperate need of renewal. Syria, for the last decade, has been marked by crisis after crisis. The situation following the 2011 uprisings for the removal of President Bashar al-Assad and the Ba'ath Party more broadly from power was almost immediately followed by one of calamity. At first, this became a crisis of militarism and power. What factions held power and who would make up the face of the opposition movement? Then, the crisis became that of an all-out civil war, one that divided Syria while stepping on Syrians anywhere the war reached. Eventually, this civil war evolved into, or perhaps just more clearly revealed itself to be, an international proxy war, taking place on Syrian geography. This war has continued to kill and displace, whether internally or externally, Syrians, creating one of the most pressing human rights crises of our time and one of the most pressing refugee crises of our time. So today, though the spectacular violence of warfare has died down quite a bit, and the issue no longer sits prominently in the international public eye, there is no shortage of violence imposed upon the Syrian people. This year alone, the Syrian people still inside of Syria have been subject to a new set of sanctions under the US Caesar Act, which has sparked a famine and a skyrocketing of gas prices in the country. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to ravage the country, taking thousands of lives, including that of my own grandmother. Due to a convergence of domestic misgovernance, the aforementioned sanctions, and broad regional and international aggression, which have exacerbated and dilapidated post-war healthcare infrastructure in Syria, while restricting access to testing, ventilators, and other means for fighting the virus. Most recently, wildfires akin to those we've seen in California have raged across the west coast of Syria, continuing to displace more and more people as the situation grows worse by the day. As the war continued to grow into a no-win end result for Syrians, regardless of which side prevailed, several scholars, activists, writers, politicians, journalists, and others who operate in the field of policy and knowledge production, to speak broadly on this development, took the stance on Syria which they saw as the best of a bad situation. They either sided with Bashar al-Assad, the current Syrian government's axis of resistance, as a means of combating Western and Western allied imperialist powers, or siding with said powers with the belief that Bashar al-Assad must be removed from power by any means necessary. In turn, with the growing number of people positioning themselves firmly on one side or the other of the Syrian war, the power of these factions only grew and solidified, making a meaningful opposition to both, which prioritized the Syrian people less and less likely. That is not to say that such a meaningful opposition was non-existent. On the contrary, there have been many individuals who have promoted the idea of this third way, which remains firmly rooted in an anti-imperialist and anti-interventionist principle while opposing the neoliberal autocracy of the Syrian government. However, at the time of the greatest panic over Syria, in those earlier years of the war, this third way was discounted by many who believed that they had to be more pragmatic in a moment as pressing as this one. Thus, people grew steeped in one side or the other, empowering them while displacing the Syrian people in the material political landscape as we arrive at the point we are now, one where Syria is hardly discussed at all because few people have much left to say to anyone who dares to disagree with them. This is where my internship in working at Salon Syria grew. Salon Syria is a project of discourse and discussion on a topic that has been subtly treated as taboo in many spheres of knowledge production. The goal of the project is to establish a platform upon which people may explore the greater nuances of the Syrian war and the crises it birthed, better developing a dialogue on the situation outside of its already archaic two-sided interpretation and opening up the potential for something better. While much of the day-to-day work I did with Salon Syria was on the editorial end, publishing various articles and other pieces, working on the site's social media pages, etc., the most substantive work I did was aiding the production of 3 major projects. The first of these projects was the Justice to Transcend Conflict Report. Conducted by the Syrian Center for Policy Research, this is a report on the varying layers of the contemporary Syrian situation, which allows us to better understand the most immediate needs of the people at a moment where almost none of them are being met. The second project was a collaboration with Jedaliya's Syria page editors, who produced a piece entitled Engaging Syria Today. Essentially, this piece was designed to reanalyze the present situation in Syria in a way that allows for a revisiting on the subject at a moment when there is little attention towards it. Through the broad analysis found in these pieces, alongside the Justice to Transcend Conflict report, I believe there's an opening for new possibilities for Syria in the arenas of policy and knowledge production that, thanks to the reflective nature of these works, allow us to free ourselves from our former notions of the war. The third project I worked on was a two-part roundtable series featuring a number of scholars, writers, journalists who have focused their work on Syria, titled 20 Years After Bashar al-Assad's Succession, commemorating the 20th anniversary of Bashar al-Assad's inauguration as president. These roundtables, by focusing not only on the Syrian uprising and war, but the political situation leading up to 2011, these scholars were able to develop a larger perspective on the contemporary situation in such a way that opens the door for development of political thought that can finally comprehend the fundamental engagements that have turned the Syrian uprising into the Syrian tragedy. Where the Syrian masses were once the primary agents of unrest and potential change in the country, that energy was quickly co-opted by opportunists and funding from outside actors, who transformed and shaped the opposition to take on an undeniably imperialist character. Since then, the Syrian people have been continually removed from any position of control or agency as it relates to their lives, having no choice but to exist at the mercy of various malicious state and non-state powers which surround them from all sides. The early years of the Syrian war could have been a site of development of our collective anti-imperialist and emancipatory imagination. Unfortunately, the dominant narratives of the war drowned out this potential. Instead, Syria became a place where the contradictions within and between various liberation theories and movements could no longer be avoided, causing the conflict to grow in varying ideological and geographical scales that continually diminished and the perceived importance of those at the center of it, the Syrian people. One of the points discussed in the roundtable on the 20th anniversary of Bashar al-Assad's succession was that the spectacularizing of Syria has ended. We have passed the era in which there's a collective sense of urgency to amend the crisis of war. This is not to say that the situation for Syrians has become any less urgent. On the contrary, I would argue that the new, quickly solidifying dynamics of violence in the country make the Syrian struggle for basic survival, let alone human rights or freedom, more urgent every day. However, the alarm with which the international community approached Syria with during the earlier phases of the war has died down, leaving us at a point of reflection with which we can finally revisit the aforementioned third way, one that stands opposed to imperialism and intervention while remaining true to the original call and collective vision of the uprising while building upon it, as a genuine path for united solidarity with and potential liberation for the Syrian people. Though this perspective may be perceived as naive or overly optimistic, as Dr. Ruth Wilson Gilmore reminds us, crisis signals systemic change, whose outcome is determined through struggle. I believe that there is a deceptively substantial benefit to the never-ending wave of crises in a place like Syria, where the current mainstream conception of what is possible and what we must prioritize has proven inadequate for the revolution and for liberation more broadly. From this seemingly inexorable place, we are more capable than ever to build out this third way, such that we get closer to appeasing the contradictions of our current political imaginations. I am optimistic about the future. I believe that freedom is on the horizon, and I believe we are at the beginning of a renewal of knowledge production and theory on Syria that will expand our map and reveal the horizon to be within our reach. I encourage you all to read Salon Syria and its affiliated e-zine